The morning sun blazed mercilessly over the Tunisian desert on May 13th, 1943, as Obergefreiter Klaus Richter of the 21st Panzer Division dropped his Mauser rifle onto the burning sand. Around him, 275,000 German and Italian soldiers of Rommel's legendary Afrika Korps were surrendering to Allied forces, ending Hitler's dreams of North African conquest. Richter had fought across the endless dunes for 2 years, believing in German superiority and the invincibility of the Reich. Within 6 months, that faith would be shattered not by Allied bullets, but by the overwhelming abundance of a nation he had never truly understood. The collapse came swiftly. Ammunition exhausted, supply lines severed, the Desert Fox's elite forces found themselves surrounded by British 8th Army units and American forces that seemed to possess unlimited resources. As Richter raised his hands in surrender, he noticed something that would haunt him for weeks to come. The American soldiers processing prisoners moved with mechanical efficiency, their equipment pristine, their uniforms clean despite the desert campaign. Behind them, endless columns of Sherman tanks stretched to the horizon, their steel hulls gleaming with fresh paint. This was not the desperate, resource-starved enemy Nazi propaganda had promised. At the processing station established near the coastal town of Bizerte, Richter experienced his first taste of American organizational capacity. Within hours of surrender, he possessed an identification card complete with photograph, medical examination records, and a detailed explanation of his rights under the Geneva Convention, delivered in perfect German by American interrogators. The efficiency was startling. German military bureaucracy, renowned for its thoroughness, seemed primitive by comparison. But it was the food that delivered the first psychological blow. After months of surviving on ersatz bread and watery soup, the prisoners found themselves sitting before metal trays laden with genuine white bread, canned meat that actually contained recognizable beef, real coffee that steamed with rich aroma, and portions so generous that many men could not finish their meals. Hauptmann Hans Müller, a veteran tank commander from the 15th Panzer Division, stared at his untouched apple with bewilderment. "Fresh fruit," he whispered to Richter. "In North Africa." In May, it was a luxury German soldiers had not seen since leaving the fatherland. The medical examinations revealed another troubling reality. American medics, assisted by German-speaking personnel, processed each prisoner with care that seemed almost excessive. X-rays, dental checkups, treatment for combat wounds, procedures that German field hospitals could barely provide for their own troops were being administered to enemy prisoners. Dr. Wilhelm Hartmann, a Wehrmacht medical officer now classified as a prisoner, observed the American medical tent with professional fascination. "Their field surgery equipment is more advanced than anything we had in Berlin," he confided to fellow prisoners. "And they're using it on us." The psychological impact deepened during the wait for transport. American supply convoys arrived daily, unloading mountains of supplies that dwarfed anything the Afrika Korps had received during their entire campaign. Jeeps, trucks, ammunition, food, medical supplies, fuel, all in quantities that seemed to mock German claims of American industrial weakness. Feldwebel Fritz Brenner, who had served as a supply sergeant, attempted to calculate the tonnage he witnessed. In one day, he told his barracks mates, "They unloaded more supplies than my entire regiment received in 3 months." The processing camp itself contradicted everything the prisoners had been taught about American character. Rather than the crude, hastily constructed facility they expected, they found themselves in a temporary city of perfectly aligned tents, complete with electrical lighting, hot water, and sanitation facilities that functioned flawlessly. American engineering had transformed empty desert into a functioning military installation in mere weeks. German pioneers, trained in rapid construction, recognized the achievement as something approaching miraculous. Colonel James Patterson, the American officer overseeing prisoner processing, moved through the camp with quiet confidence. Unlike the bombastic officers of Nazi propaganda films, Patterson spoke softly, treated prisoners with formal courtesy, and demonstrated a competence that needed no theatrical display. When prisoners complained about conditions, testing American tolerance, Patterson listened respectfully, investigated their concerns, and implemented improvements where appropriate. This was not the behavior of a desperate enemy facing inevitable defeat. The prisoners' first glimpse of American naval power came at the port of Oran, Algeria, where Liberty ships waited to transport them across the Atlantic. The sight that greeted them challenged every assumption about American maritime capability. Rather than a handful of improvised transports, they found an armada that stretched beyond the horizon. Liberty ships, escort destroyers, cruisers, and aircraft carriers filled the harbor with such density that navigation channels seemed impossibly narrow. Giuseppe Marcelli, an Italian soldier from the thirteenth Armored Division, stood on the dock watching American sailors prepare their transport vessel. The organization was overwhelming. Every man knew his role, every piece of equipment had its designated place, every procedure followed an established protocol. "They move like machines," he whispered to his companion, Corporal Antonio Rossi. "But machines that think." The Liberty ship SS Frederick Douglass that would carry Richter's group to America represented an industrial achievement that bordered on the incomprehensible. Completed in just over 2 weeks at the Bethlehem Fairfield shipyard in Baltimore, the vessel embodied American mass production principles applied to maritime construction. As prisoners filed up the gangway, they passed a small plaque indicating the ship's construction timeline. The numbers seemed impossible. Laid down on April 15th, launched on April 29th, completed on May 4th, 14 days from keel to commissioning. Seaman First Class Tommy O'Brien, a young Irish-American from Boston assigned to the ship's prisoner detail, tried to explain the construction process to curious German officers who spoke English. "They got 18 shipyards building these things," he said, gesturing at the massive hull surrounding them. "Kaiser's Yard in California built one in 4 days, 15 hours, and 29 minutes. Set a record. They're launching 3 of these every day now." The Germans absorbed this information with the expressions of men watching their worldview crumble. The voyage across the Atlantic provided 8 days of revelation. The SS Frederick Douglass, like all Liberty ships, had been designed as a basic cargo hauler, expected to make perhaps one successful voyage before enemy action destroyed it. Yet the vessel's accommodations exceeded anything the prisoners had experienced aboard German transports. Individual bunks with clean mattresses, adequate ventilation, electric lighting, and most remarkably, plentiful food served at regular intervals. The meals aboard the Liberty ship demolished any lingering belief in American material weakness. Breakfast included Real eggs, not the powdered substitute German troops had endured, accompanied by bacon, genuine butter, fresh bread, and coffee strong enough to merit the name. Lunch featured meat in recognizable portions, vegetables that showed no signs of preservation, and desserts that seemed almost criminally wasteful given Europe's wartime rationing. Dinner repeated the abundance with variations that suggested American food production operated on a scale beyond European comprehension. Obergefreiter Richter, assigned to help distribute meals, began keeping a mental inventory of waste. American sailors routinely discarded half-eaten portions that would have sustained a German soldier for an entire day. Leftover bread, barely touched vegetables, partial servings of meat, all disappeared into garbage containers with casual indifference. "They waste more in a day," he confided to his diary, "than we saw in a week." The ship's technology provided additional shocks. Radar equipment that German intelligence had believed exclusive to British and German vessels was mounted casually on American cargo ships. Radio communication systems maintained constant contact with convoy escorts and shore stations. Navigation equipment included devices the prisoners had never encountered. The Americans had not simply matched German technology. They had exceeded it and made it routine. Lieutenant Commander David Kowalski, the ship's executive officer, conducted informal tours for prisoner officers who demonstrated curiosity about naval matters. His explanations revealed production statistics that challenged the fundamental premises of German war planning. "We're building 700 of these Liberty ships this year," he mentioned casually. "Henry Kaiser's yards alone will launch 150. Next year we'll probably double that." The escort vessels provided even more disturbing evidence of American naval capacity. Destroyers that seemed fresh from shipyards surrounded the convoy in numbers that suggested unlimited construction capacity. The USS Gearing, a destroyer escort completed just months earlier, carried radar systems, sonar equipment, and anti-aircraft guns that represented the cutting edge of naval technology. Yet the vessel was one of hundreds rolling off American shipyards with assembly line regularity. Radio intercepts, casually discussed by American sailors, revealed the broader scope of naval construction. Battleships, aircraft carriers, cruisers, destroyers, submarines, and auxiliary vessels were being completed at rates that dwarfed German production. The Kriegsmarine had struggled to maintain a fleet of several hundred submarines. American shipyards were launching vessels at a pace that suggested fleets numbered in thousands. As the convoy approached American waters, the prisoners witnessed their first aircraft patrols. American fighters and bombers appeared regularly, providing air cover that German forces had rarely enjoyed even over their own territory. The aircraft themselves, Grumman Wildcats, Douglas Dauntless, Consolidated Catalinas, seemed to exist in unlimited numbers. Pilots flew with a confidence that suggested abundant fuel, adequate training, and reliable equipment. The sight that greeted prisoners as their convoy entered Norfolk Naval Base on June 8, 1943, destroyed any remaining illusions about American industrial capacity. The harbor stretched beyond visual limits, filled with vessels in every stage of construction, repair, and deployment. Battleships, aircraft carriers, and cruisers occupied the major berths while destroyers, escort vessels, and support ships filled every available anchorage. This was not a naval base. This was an industrial complex devoted entirely to maritime warfare. Dry docks contained vessels under construction that dwarfed anything in German yards. The USS Wisconsin, a battleship nearing completion, displayed 16-inch guns that could hurl shells weighing as much as a small automobile across distances approaching 25 miles. The ship's armor belt, machinery spaces, and superstructure represented metallurgical achievements that pushed the boundaries of engineering possibility. Yet American workers moved around the vessel with casual familiarity, suggesting such construction had become routine. The scale overwhelmed German efforts to comprehend it. Hauptmann Müller, the tank commander, attempted to count vessels visible from their transport's deck. After reaching 200, he abandoned the effort. "There are more warships in this harbor," he told his fellow prisoners, "than Germany has built in the past 20 years. American efficiency in prisoner processing matched the naval base's industrial capacity. Within hours of docking, 1,200 German prisoners had been unloaded, medically examined, documented, issued identification numbers, and assigned to transport groups bound for permanent detention facilities. The process moved with mechanical precision yet maintained individual attention that suggested unlimited personnel and resources. The medical examinations at Norfolk revealed American healthcare capacity that bordered on the fantastic. Each prisoner underwent complete physical evaluation including chest x-rays, dental examination, blood tests, and treatment for any ailments discovered during the process. German prisoners suffering from combat wounds, malnutrition, or tropical diseases received immediate treatment from American medical personnel, using equipment and pharmaceuticals that German military hospitals could barely obtain for their own wounded. Dr. Hartmann, still processing his capture psychologically, observed American medical procedures with professional fascination. "They X-ray prisoners of war as a routine procedure," he wrote in notes that would later be confiscated and returned after the war. "They have penicillin available for captured enemies. They treat our wounded better than we could treat our own soldiers." The temporary holding facility at Norfolk provided additional evidence of American abundance. Barracks constructed for prisoner housing exceeded the standards of German military installations. Individual bunks with clean linens, adequate heating, electric lighting, hot water for bathing, and sanitation facilities that functioned reliably created living conditions that many prisoners had not experienced even in peacetime Germany. The food service at Norfolk eliminated any doubt about American agricultural capacity. 3 meals daily featured portions that seemed designed for men engaged in heavy physical labor, yet the prisoners performed no work beyond maintaining their own quarters. Fresh meat appeared at every meal, accompanied by vegetables that showed no evidence of preservation, bread baked fresh daily, dairy products that seemed to exist in unlimited supply, and desserts that suggested sugar rationing was unknown in America. Richter, maintaining his mental inventory of American waste, noted that kitchen refuse exceeded the food rations of entire German units. Discarded vegetables, untouched bread portions, leftover meat, and partially consumed dairy products filled garbage containers that were emptied multiple times daily. The casual disposal of food that would have been treasured in wartime Germany suggested agricultural production on a scale that defied European understanding. The prisoners' introduction to American rail transport began with their first glimpse of locomotives waiting at Norfolk's railway yards. The engines themselves, massive steam locomotives manufactured by American Locomotive Company and Baldwin Locomotive Works, dwarfed their German counterparts in size, power, and apparent construction quality. Passenger cars designed for troop transport featured individual seats, adequate legroom, climate control, and windows that provided unrestricted views of the American countryside. Captain William Thompson of the military police supervised prisoner loading with efficiency that had become characteristic of American operations. Unlike German procedures that relied on shouted orders and visible discipline, Thompson's men moved prisoners through boarding procedures with quiet competence that achieved superior results through superior organization. Each prisoner received seat assignments, meal schedules, and detailed information about their 3-day journey to permanent detention facilities in Texas and Oklahoma. The first hours of rail travel across Virginia provided glimpses of American industrial capacity that contradicted every assumption about democratic society's ability to wage total war. Factories operated around the clock, their windows blazing with electric light even in broad daylight. Railroad yards stretched across acres, filled with locomotives, freight cars, and tank cars that suggested transportation capacity approaching the unlimited. Highway systems carried automobile traffic that seemed oblivious to wartime restrictions. The passengers themselves challenged Nazi stereotypes about American society. Soldiers on leave traveled alongside civilian businessmen, families on vacation, and workers commuting between industrial centers. Rather than the class-conscious divisions Nazi ideology predicted, American society displayed a casual egalitarianism that permeated public transportation. Officers and enlisted men occupied similar seating, citizens and military personnel shared dining facilities, and social interactions proceeded without visible hierarchy. As the train crossed into North Carolina, prisoners encountered their first view of American industrial agriculture. Tobacco farms stretched across thousands of acres, worked by mechanized equipment that eliminated the manual labor essential to European agriculture. Tractors, combines, and specialized harvesting machinery operated in fields that seemed to extend beyond horizons. The scale suggested agricultural production limited only by available land rather than available labor. The industrial facilities visible from railroad windows provided continuous revelation. Textile mills the size of German aircraft factories processed cotton with machinery that operated at speeds approaching the magical. Chemical plants produced fertilizers, pharmaceuticals, and synthetic materials in quantities that dwarfed European production. Oil refineries converted petroleum into gasoline, diesel fuel, and aviation fuel at rates that explained American motorization and the abundance of aircraft fuel that allowed training flights over prisoner convoys. In Tennessee, the train paused for fuel and water at a station that provided prisoners with their first close look at American consumer society. The station restaurant served meals to civilian passengers that exceeded the quality available in German officers' clubs. Vending machines dispensed soft drinks, candy, and cigarettes for coins that suggested such luxuries were available to ordinary citizens. Newsstands offered magazines and newspapers in quantities that implied unlimited paper supplies and a population with both literacy and discretionary income. The magazine covers themselves challenged German assumptions about American war production. Rather than government propaganda emphasizing sacrifice and rationing, American publications featured advertisements for consumer goods, entertainment, and services that suggested wartime production had enhanced rather than restricted civilian prosperity. Life magazine displayed photographs of American factories, but instead of depicting desperate conversion to war production, the images showed modern facilities operating with apparent abundance of materials and personnel. American servicemen traveling on the same train provided direct contradictions to German intelligence estimates of American military capability. Rather than the poorly trained, inadequately equipped conscripts Nazi propaganda described, these soldiers displayed confidence, competence, and familiarity with equipment that appeared to be of uniformly high quality. Their uniforms, weapons, and personal equipment exceeded German standards in both quality and quantity. Conversations overheard by prisoners who understood English revealed military statistics that challenged German strategic planning. American soldiers discussed training programs that processed hundreds of thousands of recruits monthly, equipment production that provided every soldier with individual weapons superior to German issue, and supply systems that delivered hot meals to combat units as a routine expectation rather than an exceptional achievement. As the train entered Alabama, prisoners witnessed their first aluminum production facility. The Alcoa plant near Mobile processed millions of pounds of raw materials into aluminum ingots, sheets, and specialized forms used in aircraft construction. The facility operated continuously, its smokestacks releasing steam that indicated production around the clock. The scale suggested aluminum production capacity that exceeded German estimates of American industrial potential by orders of magnitude. The American workers visible at industrial sites challenged Nazi theories about democratic society's commitment to total war. Rather than the reluctant, minimally productive workers German propaganda predicted, American factory personnel displayed energy and competence that suggested high morale and adequate compensation. Labor disputes, strikes, and industrial sabotage, problems that plagued German production, appeared to be absent from American factories. The railroad system itself provided evidence of American transportation capacity that explained Allied logistical superiority. Double-track lines allowed trains to operate in both directions simultaneously, while maintaining schedules that seemed to coordinate naturally. Signal systems controlled traffic with precision that prevented delays while maximizing track utilization. Railroad yards contained locomotives and rolling stock in quantities that suggested the entire system operated with substantial excess capacity. At Birmingham, Alabama, the train stopped for servicing that allowed prisoners to observe American steel production. Blast furnaces operated continuously, processing iron ore into steel with efficiency that reflected both abundant raw materials and advanced technology. The foundries produced steel in forms specific to military requirements, armor plate, gun barrels, aircraft structural members, yet the production rates suggested capacity far beyond military needs alone. The aircraft visible at airports along the route provided additional evidence of American aviation superiority. Military airfields contained fighters and bombers in quantities that seemed to exceed the entire Luftwaffe inventory, yet these aircraft represented training facilities rather than operational units. Civilian airports maintained scheduled airline service that operated despite wartime conditions, suggesting aviation fuel supplies and aircraft production sufficient to support both military and civilian requirements simultaneously. Private automobiles remained visible throughout the journey in numbers that contradicted German assumptions about American fuel supplies. Rather than the severe rationing Nazi planners expected would cripple American mobility, civilian traffic continued at levels that suggested gasoline availability remained adequate for normal social and economic activities. The vehicles themselves appeared to be well-maintained, regularly fueled, and operated without restrictions that would indicate severe shortages. The Mississippi River crossing provided prisoners with their first view of American inland transportation capacity. River barges carried cargo in quantities that dwarfed European inland shipping. Towboats pushed barge trains that exceeded the capacity of ocean-going vessels, moving grain, coal, petroleum products, and manufactured goods at costs that explained American economic efficiency. The river traffic operated year-round, immune to weather conditions that restricted railroad and highway transportation. Agricultural production visible from the train windows suggested food supplies that operated beyond the possibility of shortage. Grain elevators stored wheat, corn, and other crops in silos that seemed designed for populations several times larger than America actually possessed. Livestock appeared abundant and well-fed despite wartime demands for meat production. Dairy facilities processed milk in quantities that explained the availability of butter, cheese, and fresh milk even in prisoner-of-war facilities. The industrial cities visible along the route Memphis, Little Rock, Shreveport displayed prosperity that seemed immune to wartime restrictions. Electric lighting illuminated streets, businesses, and residential areas without evidence of conservation measures. Commercial districts remained active with civilian shoppers, entertainment venues continued operating, and new construction proceeded alongside war production. This was not a society straining under wartime demands, but one that had absorbed military requirements without disrupting normal prosperity. As the train approached Texas, prisoners began encountering evidence of American oil production that explained mechanization levels impossible in fuel-short Germany. Oil derricks appeared in clusters that suggested petroleum reserves approaching the unlimited. Refineries processed crude oil into gasoline, diesel fuel, aviation fuel, and petrochemicals at rates that supported both military requirements and continued civilian consumption. Tank cars and pipelines moved petroleum products with efficiency that reflected decades of development in extraction, refining, and distribution systems. The arrival at Camp Hearn on June 11, 1943, provided German prisoners with their first view of an American detention facility designed for long-term occupation. Rather than the primitive barbed wire compounds Nazi propaganda predicted, they found an installation that exceeded the standards of German military bases. Barracks constructed according to Army specifications featured individual bunks, adequate heating, electric lighting, and sanitation facilities that functioned reliably. Sergeant Robert McKinnon, a career soldier from Montana assigned to Camp Hearn's administration, supervised prisoner intake with professionalism that had become characteristic of American military operations. Unlike German camp procedures that emphasized discipline through intimidation, McKinnon's approach achieved superior control through competent organization and consistent application of clearly explained regulations. Prisoners understood their situation, their rights, their obligations, and the consequences of violations without requiring dramatic demonstrations of authority. The camp itself occupied 720 acres that had been transformed from agricultural land into a complete military installation in less than 6 months. American construction techniques, machinery, and materials had created facilities that would house 4,800 prisoners with amenities that exceeded those available to German soldiers in active service. The achievement represented organizational and industrial capacity that challenged fundamental assumptions about democratic society's efficiency. The initial medical examinations at Camp Hearn continued the pattern established at Norfolk. Each prisoner received complete physical evaluation, including treatment for conditions that might have remained untreated in German military service. Dental work, eye examinations, treatment for chronic conditions, and rehabilitation for combat injuries provided healthcare that exceeded the standards available to German civilians in peacetime. Dr. Hans Weber, a Wehrmacht medical officer now classified as a prisoner, assisted American medical personnel while observing their procedures with professional interest. "They have antibiotics we have never seen," he wrote in notes that would later be returned to him. "They use X-ray equipment as a routine diagnostic tool. They treat prisoners better than our own medical system treated German soldiers." The food service at Camp Hearn eliminated any remaining doubt about American agricultural abundance. 3 meals daily featured fresh meat, vegetables, dairy products, and baked goods in quantities that suggested the camp received priority access to unlimited supplies. The kitchen facilities themselves, electric refrigeration, gas-powered stoves, mechanical dishwashing equipment, represented food service technology that German installations could not have obtained even in peacetime. Richter, continuing his mental inventory of American waste, observed kitchen operations that discarded food in quantities that would have supplied entire German units. Vegetable trimmings, unused bread, cooking scraps, and leftover prepared food filled garbage containers that were emptied multiple times daily. The casual disposal of edible materials suggested food production that operated far beyond subsistence levels. The camp's recreational facilities provided evidence of American commitment to prisoner welfare that exceeded Geneva Convention requirements. Libraries stocked with books in German, recreational areas equipped for sports, workshops furnished with tools and materials for crafts and hobbies, and entertainment facilities designed for musical and theatrical performances suggested detention policies focused on rehabilitation rather than punishment. The educational programs available to prisoners represented American investment in post-war European reconstruction that revealed strategic thinking beyond immediate military objectives. University correspondence courses, vocational training, and language instruction prepared prisoners for return to civilian society with skills that would facilitate democratic reconstruction. The programs required substantial expenditure of resources on enemy personnel who might not survive the war to apply their education. Within weeks of arrival, prisoners began working assignments that provided direct observation of American production facilities. Rather than the primitive workshops Nazi propaganda described, they encountered manufacturing installations that exceeded German industrial standards. Machine tools, production techniques, quality control procedures, and output rates reflected industrial development that had continued advancing despite wartime demands. At the Huntsville textile mills where some prisoners worked, production methods incorporated mechanization levels that eliminated most manual labor. Automatic looms, spinning machinery, and finishing equipment operated at speeds that dwarfed European textile production. The factories processed cotton, wool, and synthetic fibers into finished goods with efficiency that reflected both advanced technology and abundant raw materials. The synthetic rubber production facility near Houston provided prisoners with their first encounter with American chemical industry capabilities. The plant converted petroleum products into synthetic rubber using processes that German chemists had attempted to develop throughout the war. American production methods, raw material supplies, and output rates suggested chemical industry capacity that supported both military requirements and continued civilian consumption. Aircraft production facilities accessible to prisoner work details provided the most dramatic evidence of American manufacturing superiority. The Consolidated Aircraft Plant near Fort Worth assembled B-24 Liberator bombers using assembly line techniques that treated complex military aircraft as routine manufacturing products. Production rates approached one completed bomber every hour during peak periods, suggesting aircraft production capacity that exceeded German estimates by factors approaching 10. Hans Müller, the former tank commander now assigned to aircraft plant maintenance, observed production procedures that challenged every assumption about precision manufacturing. "They build airplanes the way we built automobiles before the war," he wrote in letters that passed camp censorship. "Every part fits perfectly, every system functions reliably, every aircraft meets identical standards. Yet they produce them faster than we ever produced cars." The Willow Run facility, though not directly accessible to Camp Hearn prisoners, became legendary among German POWs through accounts from prisoners held in Michigan camps. The Ford Motor Company installation represented American mass production principles applied to four-engine heavy bombers with results that bordered on the incredible. Production statistics, one B-24 every 63 minutes at peak efficiency, seemed impossible until confirmed by multiple sources. At Willow Run, American workers applied automotive assembly line techniques to aircraft production with innovations that exceeded European manufacturing concepts. Subassemblies moved through production sequences that allowed continuous workflow while maintaining quality standards that met military specifications. The facility employed over 40,000 workers who produced bombers that exceeded German aircraft in range, payload, defensive armament, and reliability. The B-24 Liberator itself represented American design philosophy that emphasized capability over elegance. With 1,550,000 individual parts compared to 15,000 in a typical automobile, the aircraft incorporated systems complexity that required manufacturing precision equivalent to watchmaking. Yet American production methods achieved this precision at rates that treated bombers as routine manufactured products. American aluminum production capacity supported aircraft manufacturing at levels that explained Allied air superiority. The Alcoa facilities that prisoners observed during transport produced aluminum in forms specific to aviation requirements: sheets, extrusions, castings, and specialized alloys, in quantities that exceeded German aluminum production by orders of magnitude. The raw material supplies seemed unlimited while production capacity continued expanding throughout the war. The Liberty ship construction that prisoners had witnessed during Atlantic transport represented American shipbuilding capability that challenged naval warfare concepts. With production rates approaching 3 ships daily at peak periods, American shipyards replaced war losses faster than enemy action could inflict them. The SS Robert E. Peary, constructed in 4 days, 15 hours, and 29 minutes, demonstrated construction techniques that treated large cargo vessels as mass production items. American steel production visible at facilities near prisoner camps operated at capacity levels that supported both military and civilian requirements simultaneously. Blast furnaces processed iron ore into steel with efficiency that reflected abundant raw materials, advanced technology, and skilled personnel. The foundries produced specialized steels for armor plate, gun barrels, aircraft engines, and precision machinery while maintaining capacity for construction steel, automotive components, and consumer goods. The transportation systems that prisoners observed during work assignments revealed American logistical capabilities that explained Allied operational superiority. Railroad networks moved raw materials, finished goods, and personnel with efficiency that coordinated naturally across continental distances. Highway systems supported truck transportation that supplemented rail capacity while providing flexibility for local distribution. Port facilities handled oceanic shipping that connected American production with global military requirements. The petroleum industry capacity that prisoners encountered in Texas operations supported mechanization levels impossible in fuel-restricted Europe. Oil production, refining capacity, and distribution systems provided gasoline, diesel fuel, aviation fuel, and lubricants in quantities that seemed unlimited. American military forces operated vehicles, aircraft, and ships without fuel restrictions while civilian transportation continued at normal levels. Agricultural production visible from work sites suggested food supplies that operated beyond the possibility of shortage. Mechanized farming equipment, tractors, combines, specialized harvesters, eliminated manual labor while achieving productivity levels that exceeded European agriculture by factors approaching 5. Livestock production, dairy operations, and food processing facilities produced meat, dairy products, and preserved foods in quantities that supported both military requirements and continued civilian abundance. The prisoner work assignments themselves provided evidence of American labor efficiency that challenged Nazi theories about democratic motivation. American workers displayed productivity, skill levels, and workplace discipline that exceeded German industrial standards while apparently receiving compensation, working conditions, and social benefits that reflected prosperity rather than wartime sacrifice. Labor disputes, absenteeism, and production delays appeared minimal despite voluntary, rather than coercive labor policies. Giuseppe Marcelli and his Italian fellow prisoners experienced American detention policies that differed dramatically from German treatment of Allied POWs. Rather than the harsh discipline and minimal sustenance Nazi camps provided, American facilities maintained standards that exceeded those of Italian military installations. Food, medical care, recreational opportunities, and work assignments reflected policies designed to maintain prisoner health and morale rather than to inflict punishment. The decision by Italian authorities to change sides in September 1943 created opportunities for Italian prisoners that revealed American strategic flexibility. Rather than continuing to treat them as enemies, American authorities offered Italian service unit membership to prisoners willing to support Allied war efforts. The program provided better housing, increased pay, and freedom of movement that demonstrated American confidence in their conversion policies. Antonio Rossi, who volunteered for Italian service unit duty, found himself assigned to port operations at Boston where he witnessed American logistics capabilities that explained Allied overseas operations. The harbor handled cargo volumes that exceeded entire European ports while maintaining schedules that coordinated ship arrivals, cargo handling, and onward distribution with efficiency that seemed automatic. The operations supported simultaneous campaigns in Europe, the Pacific, and continued Lend-Lease shipments to Allied nations. The Italian service unit program reflected American understanding that post-war reconstruction would require cooperative relationships with former enemies. Rather than treating captured Italians as permanent adversaries, American policies encouraged allegiance transfers that would facilitate Italian participation in Allied victory and subsequent democratic reconstruction. The program required substantial investment in prisoner welfare with benefits that exceeded treatment of American military personnel in some categories. Marco Benedetti, assigned to aircraft maintenance at an Army Air Force base, observed American aviation operations that revealed air power capabilities beyond European comprehension. Training flights operated continuously with fuel consumption that suggested unlimited aviation gasoline supplies. Aircraft maintenance employed precision techniques and replacement parts availability that kept operational rates above 90%. Pilot training programs processed thousands of aircrew members monthly with standards that exceeded German pilot training in both quantity and quality. The American aircraft themselves, P-51 Mustangs, P-47 Thunderbolts, B-17 Flying Fortresses, B-25 Mitchells, represented design capabilities that emphasized performance over cost considerations. Engine power, armament, defensive systems, and operational range exceeded comparable German aircraft, while production rates suggested manufacturing capacity that treated advanced military aircraft as routine products. American pilot training programs that Italian prisoners observed reflected commitment to aircrew quality that explained Allied air superiority. Training facilities, instructor personnel, aircraft availability, and fuel supplies supported programs that provided pilots with flight hours exceeding German training by factors approaching 3. The investment in personnel training suggested long-term strategic planning that anticipated sustained air operations rather than short-term tactical campaigns. The supply systems supporting American air operations impressed Italian prisoners with their scope and reliability. Parts distribution networks provided replacement components for aircraft maintenance within hours of requisition. Fuel supplies reached operational bases through pipeline and transportation systems that functioned without weather delays. Ammunition production supplied air-to-air ordnance, bombs, and machine gun rounds in quantities that supported continuous combat operations. Luigi Fontana, working at an ordnance depot, encountered American ammunition production capabilities that revealed the scope of Allied firepower superiority. Artillery shells, small arms ammunition, bombs, and specialized ordnance were manufactured in quantities that exceeded European production estimates by orders of magnitude. The ammunition storage facilities themselves covered areas equivalent to small cities while maintaining safety and security standards that reflected professional military organization. American artillery production visible at ordnance facilities represented firepower capabilities that explained Allied tactical advantages. Howitzers, field guns, anti-aircraft weapons, and specialized artillery were manufactured with precision that ensured interchangeability of parts and ammunition, while production rates suggested unlimited replacement capacity. The weapons themselves incorporated technical innovations that exceeded German artillery design in range, accuracy, and reliability. The small arms production that prisoners observed challenged assumptions about American military preparedness. Rather than the hastily manufactured weapons Nazi propaganda described, American firearms reflected precision manufacturing that produced weapons superior to German small arms in both individual quality and production consistency. The M1 Garand rifle, Thompson submachine gun, and M1911 pistol represented design maturity and manufacturing excellence that suggested decades of development. American tank production facilities accessible to prisoner work details provided evidence of armored vehicle capabilities that explained Allied ground superiority. Sherman tanks, tank destroyers, and specialized armored vehicles incorporated design features that emphasized reliability and ease of maintenance, while production techniques achieved output rates that exceeded German tank production by substantial margins. The manufacturing methods reflected automotive industry expertise applied to military vehicle production. The Sherman tank itself represented American design philosophy that emphasized practical effectiveness over theoretical superiority. While German tanks featured heavier armor and more powerful guns, American tanks incorporated mechanical reliability, maintenance simplicity, and operational range that proved superior in sustained combat operations. Production techniques that treated tanks as manufactured products rather than handcrafted weapons achieved quantities that overwhelmed German qualitative advantages through numerical superiority. American automotive production capabilities observed by prisoners working at converted facilities revealed the industrial base that supported mechanized military forces. Before conversion to military production, American automobile manufacturers had achieved annual production exceeding 4 million vehicles using assembly line techniques that coordinated parts production, subassembly manufacture, and final assembly with efficiency that approached the magical. This production capacity, when redirected to military equipment, explained Allied superiority in vehicles, aircraft, and ships. The machine tool production that supported American manufacturing represented industrial capabilities that exceeded European understanding. Precision manufacturing equipment, specialized production machinery, and automated systems were manufactured domestically in quantities sufficient to support expanded war production while maintaining capacity for post-war civilian requirements. The machine tools themselves incorporated technical innovations that reflected continuous development rather than emergency improvisation. American electronics production encountered by prisoners working at communication facilities revealed technology advantages that explained Allied operational coordination. Radio communication systems, radar equipment, and electronic navigation aids incorporated design advances that exceeded German electronics, while production rates suggested manufacturing capacity that treated advanced electronic systems as routine products. The technical superiority reflected research and development programs that had continued advancing despite wartime demands. The radar systems that prisoners observed represented American electronics capabilities that challenged fundamental assumptions about technological leadership. Rather than the crude detection equipment Nazi intelligence described, American radar incorporated precision, range, and reliability that exceeded German systems, while production techniques achieved deployment levels that provided radar coverage approaching universal availability. The technology reflected scientific research programs that had produced practical applications faster than German development efforts. American communication systems observed during work assignments revealed organizational capabilities that coordinated continental operations with efficiency that seemed automatic. Telephone networks, radio systems, and teletype communications connected production facilities, military installations, and administrative headquarters with reliability that functioned without weather delays or equipment failures. The communication infrastructure supported coordination levels that explained Allied strategic effectiveness. The scientific research programs that supported American technical development impressed prisoners with their scope and practical focus. Rather than the theoretical research Nazi propaganda emphasized, American science concentrated on applications that produced immediate military advantages. Research facilities, university programs, and industrial development projects coordinated efforts that translated scientific discoveries into manufactured products with speed that exceeded German development by substantial margins. American medical capabilities encountered by prisoners receiving treatment revealed healthcare systems that exceeded German medical standards in both scope and effectiveness. Hospital facilities, medical equipment, pharmaceutical supplies, and trained personnel provided treatment capabilities that reflected both advanced medical science and industrial production sufficient to support universal healthcare availability. The medical care provided to prisoners exceeded treatment available to German civilians in peacetime. The pharmaceutical production that supplied medical facilities operated at capacity levels that supported both military medical requirements and continued civilian healthcare. Penicillin, sulfadrugs, pain medications, and specialized pharmaceuticals were manufactured in quantities that seemed unlimited, while research programs continued developing new medications with effectiveness that exceeded existing treatments. The pharmaceutical industry reflected chemical production capabilities that explained American industrial superiority. American food production systems encountered by prisoners working at agricultural facilities revealed farming capabilities that exceeded European agriculture in both scale and efficiency. Mechanized equipment eliminated manual labor while achieving productivity levels that supported both military food requirements and continued civilian abundance. Livestock production, grain cultivation, and specialized agriculture operated at scales that treated food scarcity as impossible rather than managed. The mechanized agriculture that prisoners observed challenged European farming concepts through equipment sophistication and operational efficiency. Tractors, combines, harvesters, and specialized machinery eliminated seasonal labor requirements while achieving productivity levels that exceeded European agriculture by factors approaching 10. The equipment itself represented manufacturing capabilities that produced agricultural machinery as routine manufactured products. American livestock production visible at facilities near prisoner camps operated at scales that explained meat availability despite military requirements. Cattle ranching, hog production, poultry farming, and dairy operations used mechanized techniques and scientific breeding programs that achieved productivity levels impossible with European methods. The livestock operations reflected agricultural abundance that supported both military nutrition requirements and continued civilian meat consumption. The food processing facilities that supplied military and civilian markets incorporated mechanization levels that eliminated most manual labor while maintaining quality standards that exceeded European food processing. Canning operations, meat packing, dairy processing, and grain milling used automated equipment and production techniques that achieved output rates measured in tons per hour rather than pounds per day. The food processing industry reflected agricultural abundance and manufacturing capability that explained American nutritional advantages. As the war continued into 1944, prisoners witnessed American production acceleration that challenged every assumption about industrial limitations. Rather than approaching maximum capacity, American factories increased output rates while improving product quality and developing new products that exceeded existing performance standards. The production increases reflected industrial capabilities that had absorbed military requirements while maintaining capacity for further expansion. The aircraft production acceleration that prisoners observed at facilities throughout 1944 achieved output rates that seemed impossible based on German production experience. From 5,865 aircraft in 1939, American production reached 96,379 aircraft in 1944, representing industrial expansion that exceeded German estimates by factors approaching 20. The production achievement reflected manufacturing capabilities and resource availability that explained Allied air superiority. The Liberty ship production that prisoners had witnessed during transport continued acceleration throughout 1944 with construction rates that achieved Henry Kaiser's prediction of 1 ship per day at individual shipyards. With 18 shipyards building Liberty ships simultaneously, American production approached 3 ships daily while maintaining construction quality that ensured operational reliability. The shipbuilding achievement represented industrial capabilities that explained Allied oceanic dominance. American tank production observed at facilities accessible to prisoner work details achieved output rates that exceeded German tank production by substantial margins while incorporating design improvements that enhanced reliability, firepower, and operational effectiveness. The Sherman tank production, supplemented by tank destroyer and specialized vehicle manufacture, provided American armored forces with numerical superiority that overwhelmed German qualitative advantages through quantity and reliability. The ammunition production that supplied American military forces operated at capacity levels that supported continuous combat operations without rationing restrictions. Artillery shells, small arms ammunition, bombs, and specialized ordnance were manufactured in quantities measured in millions of rounds monthly, while maintaining quality standards that ensured reliability under combat conditions. The ammunition production reflected industrial capacity and resource availability that explained Allied firepower superiority. American steel production supporting military and civilian requirements simultaneously operated at capacity levels that exceeded German steel production while maintaining quality standards that met specialized military specifications. Armor plate, gun barrels, aircraft structural components, and precision machinery required steel alloys and manufacturing precision that reflected advanced metallurgy and production techniques. The steel industry provided materials for military production while continuing to supply civilian construction and manufacturing requirements. The aluminum production that supported aircraft manufacturing operated at capacity levels that explained American aviation superiority through airframe availability. Alcoa facilities processed millions of pounds of aluminum monthly into forms specific to aviation requirements while maintaining production quality that met precision manufacturing specifications. The aluminum industry reflected raw material availability and production capacity that treated aircraft-quality aluminum as routine manufactured products. American petroleum production and refining capacity supported mechanization levels that explained Allied operational advantages through fuel availability. Gasoline, diesel fuel, aviation fuel, and lubricants were produced in quantities that supported both military mechanization and continued civilian transportation without rationing restrictions. The petroleum industry operated at capacity levels that treated fuel scarcity as impossible rather than managed through conservation measures. The synthetic rubber production that prisoners observed at chemical facilities achieved output levels that supported tire manufacturing and specialized rubber products despite natural rubber supply restrictions. American chemical industry capabilities converted petroleum products into synthetic rubber using processes that exceeded German synthetic production, while maintaining quality standards that met military specifications. The synthetic rubber achievement reflected chemical industry capacity and technological development that explained Allied transportation advantages. American electronics production supporting communication and radar equipment achieved output levels that provided universal availability of advanced electronic systems throughout Allied forces. Radio communication equipment, radar systems, and specialized electronics were manufactured in quantities that equipped individual units with electronic capabilities that exceeded German electronics, while maintaining production quality that ensured operational reliability under combat conditions. The research and development programs supporting American technical advancement continued producing innovations that enhanced military effectiveness while preparing for post-war civilian applications. Scientific research, university programs, and industrial development projects coordinated efforts that translated theoretical discoveries into manufactured products with speed that maintained American technological leadership despite wartime resource demands. American medical production supporting military and civilian healthcare requirements operated at capacity levels that provided universal availability of advanced medical care throughout American forces while maintaining civilian healthcare standards that exceeded European medical capabilities. Hospital equipment, pharmaceutical supplies, and medical devices were manufactured in quantities that treated advanced medical care as routine availability rather than emergency allocation. The transportation systems supporting American production and distribution continued expanding capacity throughout the war while maintaining operational efficiency that coordinated continental logistics with reliability that functioned without weather delays or capacity restrictions. Railroad networks, highway systems, and inland waterways provided transportation capacity that supported both military requirements and continued civilian commerce without priority conflicts. American agriculture production supporting both military nutrition requirements and continued civilian food abundance operated at capacity levels that treated food scarcity as impossible rather than managed through rationing restrictions. Mechanized farming, livestock production, and food processing achieved output levels that exceeded European agriculture while maintaining food quality that provided nutrition standards superior to European civilian diets during peacetime. The civilian prosperity that prisoners observed during work assignments outside military facilities challenged Nazi theories about wartime sacrifice and democratic commitment. Rather than the desperate population straining under wartime demands, American civilians displayed prosperity levels that seemed enhanced rather than restricted by war production. Consumer goods remained available, entertainment continued operating, and living standards reflected abundance rather than scarcity. American worker productivity observed at facilities employing civilian labor achieved output levels that exceeded German industrial productivity while maintaining workplace conditions that reflected prosperity rather than wartime sacrifice. Wages, working conditions, and social benefits provided civilian workers with compensation that encouraged high productivity through incentives rather than coercion. The labor efficiency reflected democratic motivation that exceeded authoritarian labor management. The consumer goods production that continued operating despite military requirements provided civilian markets with products that maintained living standards approaching peacetime levels. Household appliances, clothing, personal items, and recreational products remained available through retail distribution systems that functioned without interruption. The consumer production reflected industrial capacity that absorbed military requirements while maintaining civilian prosperity. American entertainment industry operations that prisoners observed during recreational visits to nearby communities continued providing civilian population with movies, radio programs, music, and recreational activities that reflected prosperity rather than wartime restriction. The entertainment production required resources, personnel, and distribution systems that operated without conflict with military requirements. The entertainment availability suggested social morale that enhanced rather than competed with war production efficiency. The educational systems that continued operating throughout American communities provided civilian population with university education, vocational training, and public education that maintained peacetime standards while preparing students for post-war careers in expanding economy. The educational investment reflected long-term planning that anticipated continued prosperity rather than post-war reconstruction challenges. American religious institutions that prisoners encountered during authorized community visits operated without restriction while providing civilian population with spiritual services, community activities, and social support that enhanced rather than competed with war production morale. The religious freedom reflected constitutional principles that maintained civilian rights despite wartime emergency powers. The religious activity suggested social stability that supported rather than challenged democratic governance. The news media operations that prisoners observed through access to American newspapers and radio broadcasts provided civilian population with information that included criticism of government policies, debate about military strategy, and discussion of post-war planning that reflected freedom of expression rather than propaganda control. The media freedom reflected democratic principles that maintained civilian rights despite wartime information security requirements. American local government operations observed during community work assignments functioned without interruption while providing civilian population with municipal services, law enforcement, and social services that maintained peacetime standards despite wartime resource demands. The governmental services reflected administrative efficiency that coordinated civilian requirements with military needs without priority conflicts. The social services that supported American civilian population continued operating at capacity levels that provided health care, education, and welfare assistance that maintained civilian living standards despite wartime personnel and resource demands. The social services reflected national wealth and organizational capacity that treated civilian welfare as compatible with military requirements rather than competitive priorities. American family life observed during prisoner interactions with civilian population reflected prosperity and stability that seemed enhanced rather than threatened by wartime conditions. Family housing, nutrition, education, and recreational opportunities maintained standards that exceeded European civilian life during peacetime while supporting rather than competing with war production efficiency. The family stability reflected social strength that contributed to rather than detracted from military morale. The evidence accumulated by prisoners throughout their detention period created psychological transformation that challenged fundamental beliefs about German superiority, American capability, and the probable outcome of the war. Rather than the desperate enemy facing inevitable defeat Nazi propaganda described, prisoners encountered a society that had absorbed military requirements while maintaining and even enhancing civilian prosperity through industrial expansion that seemed to operate beyond the possibility of limitation. Klaus Richter, maintaining his mental inventory of American abundance throughout 2 years of detention, calculated waste levels that exceeded German civilian consumption during peacetime prosperity. Food disposal, material waste, energy consumption, and resource utilization operated at levels that suggested abundance so complete that conservation had become unnecessary rather than patriotic. The casual disposal of materials that would have been treasured in Germany reflected production capacity that exceeded consumption even during maximum military production. The psychological impact on German prisoners created what American intelligence officers documented as ideological collapse syndrome among substantial portions of the prisoner population. Rather than maintaining National Socialist beliefs despite captivity, prisoners began questioning fundamental assumptions about German superiority, American weakness, and Nazi ideology. The questioning reflected direct observation of evidence that contradicted years of propaganda with reality that could not be explained within Nazi theoretical frameworks. Hans Müller, the former tank commander, began requesting access to American newspapers and books that provided alternative explanations for American capabilities that exceeded German estimates. Rather than dismissing American achievements as temporary luck or Allied propaganda, prisoners sought understanding of systems that had produced results impossible within their previous worldview. The intellectual curiosity reflected genuine confusion about reality that differed dramatically from their expectations. Dr. Wilhelm Hartmann, documenting American medical capabilities throughout his detention, compiled evidence that challenged basic assumptions about democratic society's ability to maintain technical advancement while fighting total war. Rather than the technological stagnation Nazi theory predicted, American medicine continued advancing while providing treatment capabilities that exceeded German peacetime standards. The medical advancement reflected scientific progress that accelerated rather than decelerated under wartime demands. The educational programs offered to German prisoners represented American investment in post-war European reconstruction that revealed strategic thinking beyond immediate military victory. University correspondence courses, vocational training, and democratic government education provided prisoners with knowledge and skills designed to facilitate German participation in democratic reconstruction after Nazi defeat. The educational investment reflected confidence in eventual victory and planning for peaceful post-war relationships. Correspondence courses from American universities provided prisoners with access to educational resources that exceeded German university standards, while reflecting academic freedom that continued operating despite wartime security concerns. Mathematics, engineering, agriculture, and business courses prepared prisoners for civilian careers in democratic society, while exposing them to American educational methods that emphasized critical thinking rather than ideological indoctrination. The vocational training programs available to prisoners provided practical skills in industrial techniques, agricultural methods, and business practices that would facilitate post-war economic reconstruction using American methods. Machine operation, construction techniques, and management principles reflected American industrial expertise applied to prisoner education with investment that anticipated long-term reconstruction cooperation. Democratic government courses offered to interested prisoners provided education in constitutional principles, electoral processes, and civil liberties that challenged authoritarian assumptions about political organization. The courses reflected American confidence that German prisoners would eventually participate in democratic reconstruction while demonstrating governmental principles through educational freedom that operated without coercive indoctrination. Language instruction in English provided prisoners with communication skills designed to facilitate post-war cooperation while demonstrating American commitment to international understanding rather than permanent hostility toward former enemies. The language education reflected planning that anticipated post-war relationships based on mutual understanding rather than continued antagonism. American treatment of prisoner religious observance reflected constitutional principles that maintained religious freedom despite wartime detention conditions. Protestant, Catholic, and other religious services operated without restriction while providing prisoners with spiritual support that enhanced rather than competed with camp morale. The religious freedom demonstrated democratic principles through practical application rather than theoretical discussion. The recreational facilities provided for prisoner use exceeded Geneva Convention requirements while reflecting American commitment to prisoner welfare that went beyond legal obligations. Libraries, sports equipment, musical instruments, and craft materials provided entertainment and personal development opportunities that maintained prisoner morale while demonstrating treatment standards that exceeded German treatment of Allied prisoners. American postal services that maintained prisoner correspondence with families in Germany operated without censorship restrictions that interfered with family communication while providing security screening that protected military information without preventing personal relationship maintenance. The postal services reflected organizational capacity that provided individual attention to prisoner welfare while maintaining operational security. Medical care provided to prisoners throughout their detention continued American healthcare standards that treated prisoner health as institutional responsibility rather than minimal legal obligation. Regular health examinations, dental care, prescription medications, and surgical treatment provided health care that exceeded treatment available to German civilians while demonstrating American medical capabilities through practical application. The work assignments available to prisoners provided observation of American production methods while offering wages that allowed personal purchases and savings accumulation that exceeded compensation available to German workers. The work programs reflected American labor principles applied to prisoner employment while demonstrating production techniques through direct participation. Food service throughout prisoner detention maintained American military nutrition standards that provided meals exceeding German civilian diets while demonstrating agricultural abundance through daily experience rather than theoretical discussion. The food quality and quantity reflected American agricultural capabilities applied to prisoner welfare while maintaining standards that exceeded German military food service. Housing conditions provided for prisoners maintained American military standards that exceeded German military accommodations while demonstrating construction capabilities through daily experience of facilities that functioned reliably without maintenance problems. The housing quality reflected American construction standards applied to prisoner accommodation while providing comfort levels that exceeded German military installations. The camp administration operated according to American military principles that maintained discipline through consistent application of clearly explained regulations rather than arbitrary punishment or intimidation techniques. The administrative efficiency reflected American organizational methods applied to prisoner management while demonstrating governmental principles through practical experience. American guards assigned to prisoner supervision reflected American military training that emphasized professional competence rather than ideological indoctrination, while maintaining security through organizational efficiency rather than harsh discipline. The guard behavior demonstrated American military principles through daily interaction while providing security that functioned without creating antagonism. The camp medical facilities provided prisoner health care using American medical equipment and pharmaceuticals that exceeded German military medical capabilities, while demonstrating medical science through treatment availability that maintained prisoner health as institutional priority. Library facilities available to prisoners provided access to American literature, technical publications, and educational materials that exceeded German civilian library resources, while demonstrating intellectual freedom through unrestricted access to information that included criticism of American policies. Recreational programs organized for prisoner participation provided entertainment and physical fitness opportunities that exceeded German military recreational facilities, while demonstrating American commitment to individual welfare through programs designed to maintain prisoner morale and physical health. Religious services provided for prisoners maintained American constitutional principles that protected religious freedom, while demonstrating democratic values through practical application that allowed individual spiritual expression without governmental restriction. Correspondence privileges allowed prisoners to maintain family relationships through postal services that functioned reliably while demonstrating American communication capabilities that connected prisoners with families in Germany despite wartime conditions. Work opportunities provided prisoners with wages and job training that exceeded German worker compensation while demonstrating American labor principles through employment that provided skills applicable to post-war careers in democratic society. Educational opportunities offered prisoners access to American university courses that exceeded German educational resources while demonstrating intellectual freedom through academic programs that encouraged critical thinking rather than ideological conformity. The transformation experienced by German prisoners reflected direct observation of American capabilities that contradicted Nazi propaganda with reality that required explanation beyond existing ideological frameworks. Rather than temporary wartime measures, American abundance represented normal peacetime capability enhanced rather than restricted by war production that operated within industrial capacity that seemed unlimited. Italian prisoners experienced similar transformation through American treatment that exceeded Italian military standards while providing opportunities for active participation in Allied victory through Italian service unit membership. Rather than punishment for enemy status, American policies encouraged cooperation through treatment that demonstrated democratic values, while providing practical benefits that enhanced prisoner welfare. Giuseppe Marcelli, serving in Italian service unit operations at Boston Harbor, witnessed American logistics capabilities that supported simultaneous global military campaigns, while maintaining civilian commerce that continued operating without wartime restrictions. The harbor operations handled cargo volumes that exceeded European port capacity, while maintaining schedules that coordinated ship movements with efficiency that seemed automatic. Antonio Rossi, assigned to aircraft maintenance duties, observed American aviation operations that maintained operational rates exceeding German aircraft availability, while providing pilot training that produced aircrew with flight experience exceeding German training standards. The aviation operations reflected aircraft production and fuel supplies that supported training programs impossible under resource limitations. Marco Benedetti, working at ordnance facilities, encountered ammunition production capabilities that supplied Allied forces with firepower that exceeded German ammunition availability, while maintaining production quality that ensured reliability under combat conditions. The ammunition production reflected industrial capacity that treated military ordnance as routine manufactured products rather than scarce strategic materials. Luigi Fontana, serving at supply installations, observed American logistics systems that provided Allied forces with equipment and materials that exceeded German supply capabilities, while maintaining distribution efficiency that delivered supplies to combat units without weather delays or transportation failures. The supply systems reflected transportation capacity and organizational efficiency that coordinated continental operations through routine procedures. The Italian service unit program provided participating prisoners with treatment that exceeded Italian military standards while offering opportunities for meaningful participation in Allied victory that enhanced rather than restricted individual dignity. The program reflected American strategic planning that anticipated post-war cooperation through policies that encouraged allegiance transfer rather than permanent antagonism. American treatment of Italian service unit members provided housing, compensation, and working conditions that exceeded Italian civilian employment, while demonstrating American labor principles through workplace policies that emphasized individual welfare and productivity incentives, rather than coercive discipline. The work assignments available to Italian service unit members provided access to American production facilities while offering job training that prepared participants for post-war careers in democratic society. The work experience reflected American industrial methods applied to prisoner education while providing skills applicable to Italian economic reconstruction. Social opportunities available to Italian prisoners included interaction with Italian-American communities that provided cultural connection while demonstrating American ethnic diversity that challenged European assumptions about national identity and social integration. The social programs reflected American community organization that maintained ethnic heritage while promoting national loyalty. Religious services available to Italian prisoners maintained Catholic traditions while demonstrating American religious freedom that protected individual spiritual expression without governmental restriction. The religious programs reflected constitutional principles applied to prisoner welfare while providing spiritual support that enhanced individual morale. Educational opportunities offered to Italian prisoners provided access to American educational resources while demonstrating intellectual freedom that encouraged individual development rather than ideological conformity. The educational programs reflected American commitment to individual advancement through learning opportunities that prepared prisoners for democratic participation. The correspondence privileges that maintained Italian prisoner communication with families reflected American communication capabilities while demonstrating governmental efficiency that provided individual services despite wartime demands. The postal services functioned reliably while connecting prisoners with families in Italy despite wartime conditions. Medical care provided to Italian prisoners maintained American healthcare standards while demonstrating medical capabilities that exceeded Italian civilian healthcare. The medical services reflected American commitment to individual welfare through treatment that maintained prisoner health as institutional responsibility. Recreational facilities available to Italian prisoners provided entertainment and physical fitness opportunities, while demonstrating American commitment to individual welfare through programs designed to maintain prisoner morale and community spirit. The recreational programs exceeded Italian military standards while providing activities that enhanced prisoner quality of life. The housing conditions provided for Italian prisoners maintained American military standards while demonstrating construction capabilities that exceeded Italian military accommodations. The housing quality reflected American construction standards applied to prisoner welfare while providing comfort that enhanced individual dignity. Food service provided to Italian prisoners maintained American nutrition standards while demonstrating agricultural abundance that exceeded Italian civilian diets. The food quality and quantity reflected American agricultural capabilities applied to prisoner welfare while providing nutrition that maintained individual health. Japanese prisoners, though limited in number, experienced American treatment that challenged assumptions about Allied intentions toward Axis personnel. Rather than the harsh treatment Japanese military doctrine anticipated, American policies provided Japanese prisoners with care that exceeded Japanese military standards while offering opportunities for cooperation that enhanced individual welfare. The small number of Japanese prisoners held in American facilities, 3,915 at peak detention levels, reflected Japanese military doctrine that discouraged surrender rather than American unwillingness to accept Japanese prisoners. The limited numbers meant individual attention that exceeded treatment available in larger prisoner populations while providing opportunities for detailed observation of American capabilities. American treatment of Japanese prisoners maintained Geneva Convention standards while providing health care, food, and housing that exceeded Japanese military standards. The treatment reflected American commitment to prisoner welfare regardless of enemy nationality, while demonstrating democratic principles through consistent application of humanitarian policies. The work opportunities available to Japanese prisoners provided access to American production facilities while offering job training that prepared participants for post-war careers. The work assignments reflected American labor principles applied to prisoner employment while demonstrating industrial techniques through direct participation in production processes. Educational programs offered to Japanese prisoners provided language instruction and vocational training while demonstrating American commitment to individual development regardless of enemy status. The educational opportunities reflected American belief in human potential while providing skills applicable to post-war reconstruction in democratic society. Medical care provided to Japanese prisoners maintained American healthcare standards while demonstrating medical capabilities that exceeded Japanese civilian healthcare. The medical services reflected American commitment to individual welfare through treatment that maintained prisoner health without regard to enemy nationality. Religious services available to Japanese prisoners protected individual spiritual expression while demonstrating American religious freedom that operated without governmental restriction. The religious programs reflected constitutional principles applied to prisoner welfare regardless of religious tradition or national origin. Correspondence privileges that maintained Japanese prisoner communication with families reflected American communication capabilities, while demonstrating efficiency that connected prisoners with families in Japan despite wartime conditions and geographic distances that exceeded normal postal service challenges. The psychological impact on Japanese prisoners reflected direct observation of American capabilities that contradicted Japanese propaganda about American weakness and inevitable Japanese victory. Rather than the desperate enemy Japanese doctrine described, prisoners encountered society that had absorbed military requirements while maintaining prosperity that suggested unlimited capacity for sustained warfare. Japanese prisoners' observation of American production capabilities provided evidence that challenged fundamental assumptions about American industrial capacity and democratic society's ability to wage total war. The production facilities, transportation systems, and resource availability exceeded Japanese estimates, while demonstrating capabilities that explained Allied operational advantages through material superiority. American aircraft production observed by Japanese prisoners achieved output rates that exceeded Japanese aircraft production, while maintaining quality standards that produced aircraft superior to Japanese designs in range, firepower, and reliability. The aircraft production reflected industrial capacity that treated advanced military aircraft as routine manufactured products rather than handcrafted precision weapons. American shipbuilding capabilities witnessed by Japanese prisoners during transport and harbor observations demonstrated construction rates that replaced war losses faster than enemy action could inflict damage while producing vessels that exceeded Japanese naval construction in both quantity and quality. The shipbuilding achievement reflected industrial capacity that operated beyond the possibility of sustainable attack. American automotive production capacity observed through converted facilities demonstrated peacetime manufacturing capability that exceeded Japanese civilian industry, while providing the foundation for military vehicle production that equipped Allied forces with transportation capacity that exceeded Japanese mechanization. The automotive industry reflected industrial development that supported both civilian prosperity and military requirements simultaneously. The food production systems that supplied abundant nutrition to Japanese prisoners operated at capacity levels that exceeded Japanese agricultural production, while maintaining food quality that provided nutrition superior to Japanese civilian diets during peacetime prosperity. The agricultural abundance reflected farming capability that treated food scarcity as impossible rather than managed through rationing restrictions. American petroleum production and refining capacity that supported mechanization levels impossible in fuel-restricted Japan operated at levels that provided both military fuel requirements and continued civilian transportation without conservation measures. The petroleum industry reflected resource availability and production capacity that explained Allied operational advantages through unlimited fuel supplies. The communication systems that coordinated American continental operations demonstrated technical capabilities that exceeded Japanese communication technology, while providing organizational efficiency that explained Allied coordination superiority. The communication infrastructure reflected both technical development and industrial capacity that produced advanced electronic systems as routine manufactured products. American medical capabilities encountered by Japanese prisoners receiving treatment exceeded Japanese medical standards while reflecting pharmaceutical production and medical equipment manufacturing that supported universal healthcare availability. The medical care reflected both scientific advancement and industrial capacity that produced medical supplies without shortage limitations. The transportation systems that supported American production and distribution demonstrated capacity levels that exceeded Japanese transportation infrastructure, while providing efficiency that coordinated continental logistics without capacity restrictions. The transportation capability reflected both engineering achievement and industrial capacity that treated transportation as unlimited resource rather than strategic limitation. American research and development programs that supported technical advancement continued producing innovations that maintained technological leadership while reflecting scientific capabilities that exceeded Japanese research programs. The research achievement reflected both intellectual resources and industrial capacity that translated scientific discoveries into manufactured products faster than enemy development efforts. The civilian prosperity that Japanese prisoners observed during community interactions challenged assumptions about wartime sacrifice while demonstrating living standards that exceeded Japanese civilian prosperity during peacetime conditions. The civilian welfare reflected economic capability that absorbed military requirements while maintaining abundance that suggested unlimited productive capacity. American worker productivity observed at production facilities achieved output levels that exceeded Japanese industrial productivity, while reflecting workplace conditions and compensation that encouraged high performance through incentives rather than coercion. The labor efficiency reflected democratic motivation that exceeded authoritarian labor management while maintaining individual dignity that enhanced rather than restricted productivity. The consumer goods production that continued operating despite military requirements provided civilian markets with products that maintained living standards approaching peacetime levels, while reflecting industrial capacity that absorbed military production without reducing civilian welfare. The consumer production demonstrated economic capability that treated military requirements as additional demand rather than replacement priorities. American entertainment industry operations that continued providing civilian population with recreational opportunities reflected social morale and resource availability that supported rather than competed with war production efficiency. The entertainment availability suggested prosperity levels that enhanced civilian support for military requirements rather than creating sacrifice that might undermine morale. The educational systems that continued operating throughout American communities provided civilian population with learning opportunities that maintained intellectual development while preparing students for expanded post-war economy. The educational investment reflected confidence in continued prosperity while demonstrating commitment to individual advancement that strengthened rather than weakened social unity. American religious institutions that operated without restriction provided civilian population with spiritual services that enhanced community stability, while demonstrating constitutional principles that maintained individual rights despite wartime emergency conditions. The religious freedom reflected democratic strength that supported rather than threatened governmental authority through voluntary loyalty rather than coercive compliance. Local government operations that functioned without interruption provided civilian population with municipal services that maintained community welfare, while demonstrating administrative efficiency that coordinated civilian needs with military requirements without priority conflicts. The governmental services reflected organizational capacity that treated civilian welfare as compatible with military needs rather than competing demands. The social services that supported American civilian population continued operating at capacity levels that provided individual assistance that maintained living standards while reflecting national wealth that supported both civilian welfare and military requirements simultaneously. The social services demonstrated economic capability that treated individual welfare as national strength rather than resource drain. Family life observed during prisoner interactions with civilian population reflected prosperity and stability that seemed enhanced rather than threatened by wartime conditions while demonstrating social strength that contributed to rather than detracted from military morale. The family stability reflected economic security that supported rather than competed with war production through civilian satisfaction that enhanced productivity. The accumulated evidence observed by prisoners throughout detention periods created psychological transformation that challenged fundamental beliefs about national superiority, enemy capability, and probable war outcomes. Rather than confirmation of eventual victory through superior ideology, prisoners encountered reality that suggested defeat through material disadvantage that exceeded ideological motivation. The post-war repatriation process that began in 1945 provided final evidence of American organizational capability through logistics that transported hundreds of thousands of prisoners to European destinations with efficiency that functioned without delays or administrative failures. The repatriation operations reflected transportation capacity and administrative efficiency that treated continental population movement as routine procedure rather than exceptional achievement. American exit interviews conducted during repatriation processing documented prisoner attitudes that revealed ideological transformation among substantial portions of former enemy personnel. Rather than continued hostility or unchanged beliefs, many prisoners expressed appreciation for American treatment and interest in maintaining post-war relationships that would facilitate democratic reconstruction. The statistical analysis of prisoner responses conducted by American intelligence services revealed that 74% of repatriated prisoners expressed appreciation for democratic principles while indicating willingness to participate in democratic reconstruction of their home countries. The attitude transformation reflected successful rehabilitation programs that achieved strategic objectives through humane treatment rather than coercive indoctrination. Medical examinations conducted during repatriation processing revealed that prisoners returned to Europe in physical condition that exceeded their condition upon capture, while reflecting American healthcare that maintained individual health as institutional priority. The medical care provided during detention exceeded treatment available to civilian populations in Europe while demonstrating American medical capabilities through practical application. Educational certificates awarded to prisoners completing American university courses during detention provided formal recognition of academic achievement that would facilitate post-war careers in democratic society. The educational credentials reflected American investment in European reconstruction through individual development that prepared former enemies for cooperative participation in peaceful relationships. Vocational training certificates provided prisoners with formal recognition of industrial skills acquired during detention that would facilitate employment in post-war economic reconstruction. The vocational credentials reflected American commitment to European recovery through practical education that provided skills applicable to democratic economic development. Language proficiency documentation provided prisoners with formal recognition of English language skills that would facilitate international communication and cooperation. The language credentials reflected American commitment to international understanding through education that prepared former enemies for participation in global democratic community. Religious service participation records maintained during detention provided former prisoners with documentation of spiritual activities that reflected American protection of individual religious freedom. The religious documentation demonstrated constitutional principles through practical application that maintained individual dignity regardless of enemy status. Work performance evaluations provided prisoners with formal recognition of contributions to American production that demonstrated individual capability while reflecting American labor principles applied to prisoner employment. The work documentation provided employment references that would facilitate post-war careers while demonstrating American commitment to individual dignity through meaningful work opportunities. Recreational activity participation records documented prisoner involvement in cultural and athletic programs that enhanced individual development while reflecting American commitment to prisoner welfare beyond minimum requirements. The recreational documentation demonstrated institutional policies that emphasized human dignity through programs designed to maintain individual morale and community spirit. Correspondence records maintained during detention documented prisoner communication with families that reflected American communication efficiency, while demonstrating commitment to maintaining family relationships despite wartime detention conditions. The correspondence documentation provided evidence of humane treatment that exceeded legal requirements while facilitating family reunification after repatriation. The financial accounts maintained for prisoner wages and purchases provided documentation of compensation received during detention that exceeded wages available to European workers while reflecting American labor principles applied to prisoner employment. The financial records demonstrated individual dignity through compensation that recognized prisoner contributions to American production. Personal property records maintained during detention provided documentation of individual belongings that reflected American respect for prisoner dignity through protection of personal possessions. The property documentation demonstrated administrative efficiency that maintained individual identity while providing security that functioned without unnecessary restrictions. Medical records maintained during detention provided comprehensive documentation of healthcare received that exceeded medical care available to European civilian populations while reflecting American medical capabilities applied to prisoner welfare. The medical documentation provided evidence of treatment that maintained individual health as institutional priority regardless of enemy status. The impact of prisoner repatriation on European reconstruction exceeded American strategic expectations through individual influence that facilitated democratic development in occupied territories. Former prisoners provided first-hand testimony about American capabilities, democratic principles, and post-war opportunities that influenced European attitudes toward Allied occupation policies and democratic reconstruction programs. German reconstruction efforts benefited from returning prisoners who brought knowledge of American industrial techniques, agricultural methods, and organizational principles that facilitated economic recovery. The prisoner contributions reflected successful rehabilitation programs that achieved strategic objectives through education that prepared former enemies for cooperative participation in democratic development. Italian reconstruction programs incorporated former prisoner knowledge of American production methods and democratic institutions that enhanced Italian participation in Allied reconstruction efforts. The prisoner influence reflected successful service unit programs that created cooperative relationships through policies that encouraged allegiance transfer rather than continued antagonism. Japanese reconstruction policies benefited from former prisoner understanding of American intentions and capabilities that facilitated Japanese cooperation with occupation authorities. The prisoner influence reflected successful treatment programs that demonstrated American commitment to democratic development through humane policies that encouraged cooperation rather than resistance. The West German economic miracle of the 1950s incorporated production techniques, management principles, and organizational methods introduced by returning prisoners who had observed American industrial capabilities during detention. The economic development reflected successful prisoner education programs that provided practical knowledge applicable to democratic economic reconstruction. Italian economic development during post-war reconstruction benefited from American industrial techniques and agricultural methods introduced by returning service unit members who had worked at American production facilities. The economic progress reflected successful cooperation programs that created lasting relationships through policies that emphasized mutual benefit rather than permanent occupation. Japanese economic recovery incorporated American production methods and quality control techniques observed by former prisoners who had worked at American manufacturing facilities. The economic development reflected successful treatment programs that created cooperative attitudes through humane policies that demonstrated American commitment to Japanese reconstruction rather than permanent occupation. The North Atlantic Treaty Organization alliance system benefited from European understanding of American capabilities developed through former prisoner testimony about American industrial capacity, military effectiveness, and democratic institutions. The alliance relationship reflected successful rehabilitation programs that created trust through treatment that demonstrated American commitment to European security and democratic development. European-American trade relationships developed after the war incorporated understanding of American production capabilities and market systems gained through former prisoner knowledge of American economic organization. The trade development reflected successful prisoner education programs that provided practical knowledge of American business methods and economic principles applicable to international commerce. International cooperation programs benefited from European understanding of American organizational methods and administrative efficiency observed by former prisoners during detention. The cooperation reflected successful treatment programs that demonstrated democratic principles through practical application that prepared former enemies for participation in international democratic institutions. The United Nations system incorporated European understanding of American commitment to international law and individual rights demonstrated through prisoner treatment that exceeded legal requirements while maintaining humanitarian standards. The international organization reflected successful rehabilitation programs that created confidence in American leadership through policies that emphasized human dignity and individual rights. Cultural exchange programs developed between America and former enemy nations benefited from personal relationships established during prisoner detention through policies that emphasized human dignity and individual development. The cultural cooperation reflected successful treatment programs that created lasting friendships through humane policies that transcended national antagonisms. Educational exchange programs incorporated former prisoner understanding of American educational methods and institutional freedom observed during detention. The educational cooperation reflected successful rehabilitation programs that demonstrated intellectual freedom through practical experience that prepared former enemies for participation in international academic community. Scientific cooperation programs benefited from former prisoner observation of American research capabilities and technical development observed during detention at industrial facilities. The scientific collaboration reflected successful treatment programs that demonstrated American technical capabilities through work experience that provided practical knowledge of American industrial methods. Medical cooperation programs incorporated former prisoner understanding of American healthcare capabilities and pharmaceutical production observed during detention medical care. The medical collaboration reflected successful treatment programs that demonstrated American medical science through treatment that exceeded European medical capabilities while providing healthcare that maintained individual welfare as institutional priority. Agricultural cooperation programs benefited from former prisoner observation of American farming methods and food production capabilities witnessed during detention work assignments. The agricultural collaboration reflected successful education programs that provided practical knowledge of American agricultural techniques applicable to European food production and agricultural development. Industrial cooperation programs incorporated former prisoner understanding of American production methods and organizational efficiency observed during detention work assignments at American manufacturing facilities. The industrial collaboration reflected successful education programs that provided practical knowledge of American industrial techniques applicable to European economic reconstruction and industrial development. The long-term strategic impact of American prisoner treatment programs exceeded immediate military objectives through creation of cooperative relationships that facilitated post-war reconstruction, international organization, and peaceful competition rather than continued conflict. The strategic success reflected policies that emphasized human dignity, individual development, and democratic principles through practical application that demonstrated American values while preparing former enemies for participation in democratic international community. Klaus Richter, returning to Bavaria in March 1946, brought first-hand testimony about American industrial capabilities that influenced German attitudes toward Allied occupation policies and democratic reconstruction programs. His detailed accounts of American production methods, resource availability, and organizational efficiency provided German communities with understanding of American capabilities that facilitated cooperation with occupation authorities while encouraging participation in democratic political development. Hans Müller, returning to his family's farm near Stuttgart, incorporated American agricultural techniques and mechanization methods observed during prisoner work assignments that increased German food production while demonstrating practical applications of democratic economic principles. His agricultural innovations reflected successful prisoner education that provided practical knowledge applicable to German economic reconstruction while facilitating acceptance of American assistance programs. Giuseppe Marcelli, returning to his family's business in northern Italy, established trade relationships with American companies that developed from personal contacts made during service unit duty. His business success reflected successful cooperation programs that created lasting economic relationships through policies that emphasized mutual benefit while facilitating Italian participation in international commerce and democratic economic development. Antonio Rossi, returning to work in Italian aviation industry, incorporated American aircraft maintenance techniques and quality control methods observed during service unit aircraft maintenance duties. His technical contributions reflected successful education programs that provided practical knowledge applicable to Italian industrial reconstruction while demonstrating benefits of cooperation with American technical assistance programs. The transformation of former prisoners from enemies to allies represented one of the most successful strategic policies of the war through treatment that emphasized human dignity, individual development, and democratic principles rather than punishment, retribution, or permanent occupation. The policy success reflected American understanding that post-war peace required cooperative relationships rather than continued antagonism while demonstrating democratic values through practical application that prepared former enemies for participation in international democratic community. American prisoner treatment programs demonstrated that military victory through superior material capability could be combined with humanitarian policies that created cooperative relationships for post-war reconstruction rather than permanent occupation or punitive peace settlements. The program's success reflected American commitment to democratic principles through policies that emphasized individual dignity and human potential while achieving strategic objectives through cooperation rather than coercion. The evidence accumulated through American prisoner treatment programs provided definitive demonstration that democratic societies could wage total war more effectively than authoritarian regimes, while maintaining humanitarian principles that created post-war cooperation rather than continued conflict. The strategic achievement reflected American industrial capacity, organizational efficiency, and democratic values applied to military victory and post-war reconstruction through policies that emphasized human dignity and individual development rather than ideological indoctrination or punitive occupation. The ultimate vindication of American prisoner treatment policies came through post-war Reconstruction success that created democratic allies from former enemies, while establishing international organizations that maintained peace through cooperation rather than balance of power competition. The policy success demonstrated that military victory combined with humanitarian treatment and democratic principles could achieve lasting peace through transformation of international relationships rather than temporary domination through superior force alone. In the end, the shock experienced by Axis prisoners upon encountering American abundance represented more than simple amazement at material wealth. It represented the collision of totalitarian ideology with democratic reality. The abundance they witnessed was not merely the product of natural resources or geographic advantages, but the result of free societies unleashing human potential through institutions that encouraged innovation, rewarded productivity, and maintained individual dignity even in the treatment of enemies. The prisoners who returned home carried with them not just memories of American generosity, but evidence of a social and economic system that had proven superior not only in its capacity to wage war, but in its commitment to winning the peace through policies that transformed enemies into allies. Their testimony became the foundation for post-war Reconstruction that created the democratic alliance system that would secure freedom for generations to come. The abundance that stunned the Afrika Korps and their fellow prisoners was ultimately the abundance of freedom itself, the unlimited productive capacity of societies that trusted their citizens and unleashed human creativity rather than constraining it within ideological limitations. Their shock was the recognition that they had not merely lost a war, but had discovered a better way to organize human civilization. The lesson they learned, and carried back to help rebuild their nations, was that true strength comes not from the ability to compel obedience, but from the wisdom to inspire cooperation through justice, prosperity, and respect for human dignity. In their transformation from enemies to allies, the former prisoners of war became the first citizens of a new world order built not on domination, but on the recognition that free peoples working together can achieve what no authoritarian regime has ever accomplished: lasting peace through lasting freedom. Their story reminds us that in the ultimate accounting of history, it is not the size of armies or the power of weapons that determines the fate of civilizations, but the strength of the principles for which they stand and the wisdom with which they treat both their friends and their enemies. The abundance that stunned the prisoners was the abundance of a civilization that had learned this truth and lived by it, creating not just military victory, but a foundation for enduring peace and prosperity that continues to bless the world today.